Thank you very much. Can everyone hear me with that? Yep, beautiful. I'm really excited to be here to talk about this initiative that we're part of. It's a national initiative that's been led by Linda Broadhurst and Suzanne Prober from CSIRO. Those who don't know, Linda's the Director of the National Centre for Biodiversity Research and the head of the National Herbarium as well. For those who have never heard of WABSI, or the WA Biodiversity Science Institute, we're an unincorporated joint venture between 4 Western Australian universities, 4 government departments and the CSIRO to help coordinate collaborative science in Western Australia. And so we function a little bit like NRM RAIN here in South Australia. My own personal background, I spent about 15 years in the academic sector, lecturing at UWA and Charles Darwin Uni, and then I spent the last 5 years working for one of the NRM regions in WA, the Avon or Wheatbelt NRM region. So a bit of the experiences here come from seeing both the science and the NRM planning space and some of the opportunities that I think we've been missing, really easy opportunities that I think we can integrate into future plannings. So, to start off, they're big numbers. We've seen a lot of funding going into restoration activities and conservation, particularly in the agricultural landscape. It's estimated about $7.5 billion. Lots of wonderful outcomes out there in our landscapes. Some species recovery, some seed and plant supply chain development. There's nurseries out there in the wheat belt that are thriving businesses now because of that investment. We've got really well developed land care and practitioner networks. We've got some improvements in land degradation. And we've seen in the restoration world this continual improvement. Who remembers back to the 90s where planting river red gums or in WA spotted gums or the like was the wonderful world of land care, and how far we've come now in terms of our understandings of species mixes, direct seeding opportunities. We're talking about pollination services or other attributes that are tied to restoration. So we see that restoration science, and we mustn't forget this, it's a really young and emerging discipline. My gratuitous photos of hope, success that we see all over us, and then we all have experiences like this. So this was some photos that a landholder who's also a soil scientist within the Department of Ag in our region just sent me the other day, just because he was so proud of what he had achieved, 2006, 2017. Off his own back, seeing some wonderful outcomes. So continuing improvement in restoration, because restoration science is so young, is fundamental to the science development. The National Restoration Standards that were launched this year, if everyone's familiar with them, the principle 5 is that science and practice are synergistic. So that this concept of ecological restoration being the application, restoration science or restoration ecology being the underpinning science, because of the timeframes, these things go hand in hand. What we are doing now is going to influence our learning in 10, 20 years' time down the track. But that development has been really opportunistically driven. So there's been little individual research projects here with one group over on this side. We've got competing philosophies within restoration. We've got novel ecosystem development, and we heard this morning with Sarah Peck's talk about how we're actually seeing biodiversity and novel approaches to biodiversity in these landscapes. And we've got these things happening over multiple timeframes. And new National Land Care program that's coming out now, the regional land partnerships, a lot more emphasis on saying, well, can we actually demonstrate outcomes in terms of long-term ecological outcomes from these activities? And the answer for the most part is no. And of course we've got things like climate change coming into influence our restoration planning. And we don't really know how well to tackle that. There's some guidance out there, but it's horses for courses. We've had trials in Western Australia where we've used drier provenance Banksia seedlings, and they performed worse than local provenance seedlings. So we need to understand that better. So what's our concept? What are we proposing? This question of, can we build a nationally distributed network of restoration planting specifically designed to answer key environmental questions? I know every day that as a practitioner people are going out and they are trying different things. We're trying a different soil preparation technique. We're trying a different seed mix. We're trying a different use of provenance. This concept of experiments is actually very well embedded into practitioner thinking. Can we formalise those relationships into a nationally structured system that helps us answer the key questions that are affecting restoration practices? So there's some existing activity. There's desire by different agencies to track change. We've got, seen the academic literature, papers by Linda and Susan and others about how to do these, these long-term experimental plantings as part of restoration activities. We've got, so that picture there is from Suzanne's work at the moment with Greening Australia, embedding climate adapted provenance trials into Greening Australia's restoration programs. Well-designed experiments, clearly able to be integrated into active plantings with good data management, good data collection, and formally recognised as part of a national network of sites. Otherwise, we've got things like, this is a study that I ran whilst I was at Wheatbelt NRM. Wonderful. We sent a consultant out there to establish monitoring sites over about 30 different past restoration activities. In this context, the question was, do agroforestry or production-based plantings provide similar biodiversity values to past land care or biodiversity-oriented restoration? So we've got an opportunistic study here with sites established, but that's sitting within the Wheatbelt NRM office or in a report. It could be much better targeted if it was part of a national infrastructure. They were the 30 sites, widely spread. Oops. And of course, we've got stories like this. Every region across Australia talks about learnings that are coming out of our landholders, learnings that are coming out of our practitioner community. How do we take those learnings into the scientific domain? So that's sort of the background about why we need this infrastructure. Those things, if they're opportunistic, I think we're missing a lot of opportunities for broader understanding. Why do we need that infrastructure? Well, we actually need formal, these things don't just happen on their own. Having a point of contact where we can work on one site together, scientists, practitioners, to address key questions that are common to us, to discuss what the key questions are. I think this is a fundamentally important point. This is a framework that's come out of Ben Miller's work at Kings Park in WA that talks to all the different questions that we might have as a practical restoration ecologist that still need to be addressed, from establishing targets and planning, sourcing material, optimising establishment, facilitating growth and survival, and long-term sustainability, biodiversity outcomes. There are lots of questions that we need to learn. There's an opportunity through all of the practitioner-led land care plantings happening out there to embed those experiments, help us answer these questions collectively as a community. That's the rationale. Where are we up to? Well, we had a workshop last year where we had people from across Australia come together, practitioners and scientists, and talk about what these guidelines might look like. We've all agreed to develop some national guidelines. The guidelines are going to be simple to follow and will help us to have a structured way in which these experiments can be embedded into practitioner plantings. They have 8 sections: planning, design, planting, monitoring, science partnerships, data storage, and ethics and legacy. Lead authors for each of those sections come from across Australia, and each of those sections have, I think we've got about 25 people at the moment contributing to the guidelines. Our timetable is that we are halfway through drafting those guidelines at the moment, but part of the reason why I'm here today is we want to talk to regions, to people who are involved in restoration plantings, and tell us why this is important to you and how it might make it work. There are barriers we know in this space to embedding these experiments in terms of added workload. How do we make that more efficient? In terms of partnerships, we've heard at this conference over and over again, we need better practitioner and science relationships. Well, how do we make that happen, and how can these guidelines help? So please get back to us. Oh, I haven't got those next slide, but we're looking for reviewers and road testers. So please, if you're interested, get in contact with us. In terms of other papers, we've got a discussion paper that's just been submitted to the Commonwealth Government. We're working on this national framework. We're looking at how it could be resourced. We're looking at governance models through the existing NRM model, TURN, or other agencies. We're working with the WA NRM regions on potentially a pilot project to see how it might operate functionally. And then we're working with the research community to say, okay, we might set up this infrastructure, but it's up to the research community to then go and find funding to enable the science that's going to be leveraged from this infrastructure. I've gone backwards. So how to get involved? If you are interested in being part of that road testing process, please contact Linda or Suzanne, or you can contact myself. At any point, keen to discuss the concept. And if you're interested in maybe being part of a pilot project development in the near future, let us know as well. And that's my racing through. At the moment, I want to acknowledge again the scope of organisations that have expressed interest in this. And when I've talked to people, I like projects that just, you know, the feedback that I've had from some people is this is a no-brainer. It works, it fits, so let's make it happen.